Merci beaucoup. Donc pour pas trop prendre de retard, mais nous nous adapterons. Je donne la parole et je suis très content. I'm very happy to have among us Pierre-Henri Gouyon to make a general introduction to the meeting. Sorry.
Thank you. So yes, as a hybrid between the AgroParistech and the Museum of Natural History, I'm very glad to give a short talk about this meeting. We are just 20 minutes late, so I'll keep the 20 minutes. So I wanted to introduce this meeting by just pinpointing some little points. One is from Lamarck to Darwin and the species concept. First, let me remind you, in the museum we have very old cellars, and we found these very beautiful posters, which are exactly 100 years old, where the Academy of Sciences and the museum were sending congratulations to Cambridge University, and particularly the museum was saying that they were celebrating the centenary of Lamarck's book, Philosophie zoologique, which was published in 1809, that is 200 years ago, so that we should, at least in France, have told that there were 3 anniversaries this year, because Darwin had the very good idea of being born just in the very year of the publication of the Philosophie zoologique. The Academy of Sciences congratulates for Darwin's birth, but they also talk about the Philosophie zoologique, and the museum is very happy of the very nice coincidence which makes that these two very big people can be congratulated together. If we come a bit earlier in the 17th century, people accepted very easily that individuals could skip from one species to the other. That was the metamorphosis. And at that time, the species concept was a concept of form, and some individuals could skip from one form to the other. The species remained unchanged by the fact that individuals could change from one species to the other. This was stopped in the 18th century with the big systematicists, and in particular Linnaeus. And Linnaeus had a very, I didn't know whether this talk would be in French or in English, so I have the text in both languages. Well, we don't want to, so let's take the English one. And Linnaeus says, all species reckon the origin of their stock in the first instance from the veritable hand of the Almighty Creator. For the author of nature, when he created species, he imposed on his creation an eternal law of reproduction and multiplication within the limits of their proper types. So Linnaeus very clearly states that species have been created and not individuals. But Linnaeus knows that individuals can be different within species, and what does he do with that? He says he did indeed, in many instances, allow them the power of sporting in their outward appearance, but never that of passing from one species to another. Hence, today, there are 2 kinds of differences between plants. This is in the introduction of the book on plants. One, a true difference, the diversity produced by the all-wise hand of the Almighty. This is biodiversity from Linnaeus' point of view, the diversity of species. And the other, the difference between individuals within the species, he says, is a variation in the outside shell, the work of nature in a sporting mood. Sportive, for the French, just means, come on, dear. It's not a sport, it's, in the actual sense, it's, well, I'll say it later. Well, I have it in French, actually, so it's caprice, yes. So usually translated by caprice. With this point of view, it's very easy to make conservation biology, and the first guy who did that was called Noas, and we know that for conserving biodiversity, he just had to take a couple of each individual in each species. Now we know that it doesn't work, and we know that with only 1 or 2 individuals per species, we would have too much consanguinity, and people are now concerned with the diversity within species, not because they enter it into the concept of biodiversity, but just because it's necessary for maintaining the species. In lots of cases, at least. At that time, there was the idea of a chain of being. I like this one, you know, non-being, minerals, plants, animals, women, men, demons, angels, God, okay? Well, you can have more or less detailed ones, but the idea was that there was a chain of beings with superior and inferior types, and we still, unfortunately, use the words superior animals or inferior animals. I don't know when we will stop using these words. Well, there were nice drawings about that. Well, I won't comment too much on that. Well, just to recall you that one thing which had to be discovered from Linné to now was that species go extinct, and that Buffon certainly started, but Cuvier was the one who really insisted on extinctions. And Cuvier was living in the museum at the same time as Lamarck, and Cuvier and Lamarck hated each other. This is, for young scientists, I want to tell you, it occurs sometimes that we don't like a colleague. Okay? And when you hate a colleague, like these two ones, they really hated each other. It's very difficult to see what's interesting in what the other says. Lamarck said that species were transformed, and Cuvier said that species went extinct, and both of them refused to see what was interesting in what the other said. Both of them fought against the other, and certainly that was a part of the fact that the Museum of Natural History actually stopped after that for a while being interesting in this subject, and that unfortunately the English took over. So Lamarck is well known to have founded his theory of transformation of species on the inheritance of acquired characters. This is a drawing of the 19th century with this guy having lost his leg in some accident, and who is very proud to see that his son has inherited his trait. Well, I suppose here it's not necessary to say that this never works. In some kind of cases, I have to. Now, Lamarck insisted on this point at a very, very extremely. Now, let's see, for instance, the birds, what Lamarck says about the birds. He says that they go across the air and they go in all directions, and that they inflate their lungs to increase their volume and then become lighter, which means that Lamarck was not very good in physics. And he made that his lung then stuck to the lateral parts of the chest, and has made that the air which was inside, carved the lung and the envelopes, and penetrate in all the parts of the body and within the big bones which are carved, and in the great feathers, okay? He actually has, he wonders, why does this not happen in bats? And he has a very interesting remark about that. He says, if the birds have their lungs carved and their hair changed into feathers, why not the bats? And he answers that the reason is that the bats are more perfect than the birds, and that then their diaphragm is closed, and then the air cannot get out, and then it cannot arrive everywhere, and arrive at the skin, and at the base of the skin, then inflate the hair into feathers, you see. Now let's go to the to big animals. Why do they have horns? He says that they are very easily angry, and then their interior feeling, by its efforts, makes the fluids to go to the head, because they, and then this makes the birth of horns. So, well, the very well-known example of the giraffe, this drawing is very well-known, but it's not correct, because the four legs should be shorter. Actually, what Lamarck says is that the efforts they make to get to the leaves makes that their legs become longer and their neck become longer too. Everybody knows this example. So from that point of view, Lamarck is really a caricature, that really he thought that efforts could do everything about the inheritance. But also he has a very nice part about the origin of humans. He explains that if a very complex ape could stop climbing into trees, his hand would be changed into feet, and he would develop the language. And he says that finally this is how humans could be derived from apes. And the last sentence is interesting. These are the reflections which we could make if humans, considered here as the race, the preeminent race, which I have discussed, was distinguished from the animals only by the organization, and if his origin was not different from theirs, that is, he doesn't want to have too many problems with religious people. But also, Lamarck has very, very interesting and very modern points of view. So on one side, Lamarck was very, very old-fashioned, and on the other side, he was really incredibly modern. For instance, he long believed that constant species existed, but in 1802 he writes, "Now I'm convinced that I was wrong from the point of view, and that in nature there are only individuals." The idea that species do not exist, but that only individuals exist, is really one of the important contributions of Lamarck. And then he calls species a collection of individuals, which for a sufficiently long time do not differ from each other by any fundamental difference. Also, Lamarck gives this little picture in the end of the Philosophie Zoologique. Some people wanted to see in that the first phylogenetic tree. It is not a phylogenetic tree, I'm sorry. The idea is that the interesting idea is that there is an internal force which makes individuals get more and more complex as time passes. And that this would make a chain of life, a chain of beings, as was proposed before. But that the circumstances of the environment make that there are divergences. And that instead of having this chain of being, you have a branching process which produces beings. But all these beings are contemporary. They all exist today. And he says that this would make that the whole living world would be totally continuous today if there are not, which he doubts, any extinct species. Okay, that's what he writes here. I say that they form a branching series, irregularly changing, which has no discontinuity in its parts, or would not have, or which at least had not always, if it's true that some species have been lost. Okay, okay. Now, what Darwin added to that then is, as everybody knows, natural selection. I will not discuss that. It's been said before that, oh, sorry. Well, okay. Natural selection is very often misunderstood because people think that there's competition between species. I like very much the story that Richard Dawkins tells about dinosaurs, about that. He says, imagine two little dinosaurs, you know, they're wandering and then suddenly appears a Tyrannosaurus Rex and they start running. And the T-Rex is running after them, and one of the little dinosaurs tells to the other, we're stupid, why do we run? There's no chance we can run faster than the T-Rex. And the other says, oh, but I'm not trying to run faster than the T-Rex. I'm trying to run faster than you. Yeah? Natural selection is between individuals. It's not between species, it's not between races. Well, I will not discuss Wallace here, but so it's really the difference between individuals which makes the difference. Darwin, as was said before, discovered the beauty of the tropical world and the horror of what is living in this world. The fight for existence was made very obvious to him in these kinds of situations where plants grow over others. And certainly you could not see that in the English countryside. You see, it was very different. So, well, this has been said already, and I'm sure it will be discussed at long, so I will not go again on this story of discovering natural selection on one side and divergence on the other are the two pillars on which Darwin has founded his theory. I will pass. About the origin, the difference between Darwin and Lamarck is that Darwin develops the idea that there's been only one origin. Actually, he was convinced there was only one origin. He never writes it. He says that there is grandeur in this view of life with its several powers having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or into one. By the Creator was added only in the second edition of The Origin of Species. It was not present in the first one. Well, this you can discuss if you wish. And the second point which I wanted to insist on is the fact that he says a few form or into one. Actually, he believed there was only one. He writes that in a, sorry, this is the French part. He writes that in a very nice letter where he says that if, and oh what a big if, we could conceive in some warm little pond with all sorts of ammonia and phosphoric salts, light, heat, electricity, etc. present, that a protein compound was chemically formed, ready to undergo still more complex changes, at the present day such matter would be instantly devoured or absorbed, which would not have been the case before living creatures were formed. So the reason why he thinks there's only one origin is because the others will eat any new origin which would occur today. What's remarkable is the similarity between what he says here and the experiment of, which was made in 1953 about this question. But for me, the main point in the origin of species is the figure, the diagram, which is this one. This diagram for me is the one which shows what is biodiversity. Biodiversity is made of constant production of new forms, constant extinction of a number of forms, and the result being divergence. Why divergence? Because the forms which are nearer of each other are more likely to go extinct than the forms which have diverged because they are more strongly in competition. So the idea that competition and niche differentiation is the reason why the differentiation occurs is at the center of the process of differentiation proposed by Darwin. What I would like to insist on now is on the fact that when people think of biodiversity, it would be good that they think of that instead of thinking of lists of species. And that's, well, that or that, I don't mind. But probably more the other with extinction, a process of extinctions and creation of new forms. Darwin says that there certainly no clear line of demarcation has yet been drawn between species and subspecies, that is, the forms which, in the opinion of some naturalists, could come very near to, but do not quite arrive at the rank of species, or again between subspecies and well-marked varieties, or between lesser varieties and individual differences. So from species to individuals, there's no difference. It's just a question of level. These differences blend into each other in an insensible series. This is very important. How can we still be giving description of biodiversity as lists of species 150 years after this was published? Actually, Darwin saw that this was a difficult point, and in a letter to a friend in 1860, that is 1 year after the publication of The Origin of Species, he writes, "I am often in despair in making the generality of naturalists even comprehend me. Intelligent men who are not naturalists and have not a bigoted idea of the term species show more clearness of mind." Bigoted, for the French, means bigot, like for us, okay? So, from that point of view, giving this kind of description of biodiversity for me is absolutely forbidden. There's no reason why the number of species of insects or of plants, it's not because I'm a botanist, but there's no way I can accept the idea that there is much more diversity in insects than in plants. I'm sure that with an equal level of diversity, insects make very, very small slices, species very, very easily, while plants keep a lot of diversity within each species. The result is that this tells me nothing about biodiversity, and I'm really sorry that this is still presented to poor students without defense. The biodiversity should be presented that way. Well, and well, I will skip on that because I just wanted to say that unlike certain people here, I think that the concept of information would be very important to develop, and that the interesting point is that information is transmitted within the tree, not in such a simple way as a single tree, but like that. I also will not insist now on epigenetic information because it will be discussed later. Just to conclude, because we're at the Agronomic Institute, I would like to tell you that in the beginning of genetics, Nikolai Vavilov, who was the Russian geneticist, insisted on the importance of biodiversity within cultivated species. And if there's been something very bad in France, we've separated, well, it's general actually, we've separated genetic resources on one side and biodiversity on the other. Biodiversity seeming like diversity of species and genetic resources being the genetic diversity of useful species. Okay? Now, if we have a comprehensive view of biodiversity, going really from individuals to the biosphere, there's no reason to separate genetic diversity from species diversity. It's only one thing concerning, and I think there's a big threat today on biodiversity. We all know that. But the big threat which we should be very concerned here, and I'm very glad that André Gallet arrives at that time because he's been one of the main actors on this question, is, is the diversity of cultivated plants. The diversity of seeds, the diversity of germplasm in agronomy. The fact that a number, a very high, well, all farmers have been reproducing, finish my time now, so I'll just conclude. All farmers have been reproducing their seeds for a long time, and this ensures the high diversity of cultivated plants. Progressively, some people became the specialists for producing seeds, that was the seed farmers, and these ones still maintained a certain level of diversity because they were numerous. But the fact that now, today, the number of people producing seeds in agronomy is becoming so small, and that big companies are investing massively to take over this, is producing a very big threat on biodiversity in cultivated plants. The worst is that they pretend that they will save it by putting it in the fridge in Svalbard. This is the worst thing I've ever heard. These seeds will die within this fridge. They will not be able to regenerate them. The result is that this operation is an operation which makes that biotechnology will be the only way to go back to diversity once all these seeds are kept here and are dead. So biotechnology is killing diversity in the living forms and keeping it in dead forms so that it will be the only one which can take it over. So to conclude, I would just like to tell you that Lamarck died ignored. His daughter was the only person caring with him, and Darwin, on the other hand, was a very recognized man in the end of his life. I hope that we will be able in France now to recognize a bit more of Lamarck and of what he said. And also I would like to tell you that there are proofs that apes and us are cousins and that we should make them more obvious to a lot of people. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.